Hello, Mrs. Moss here again to talk to you about landscape development. Now, we talked about the climates and how they can influence a landscape, and we talked about other factors about landscapes, mountains, plateaus, plains. Now we're going to talk about how landscapes develop. And we mentioned a lot of this already, but let's reiterate it. Landscapes result from uplifting and erosion. Uplifting, bringing the rocks and the surfaces to a higher elevation, and erosion, wiping it out or leveling and flattening the landscape. So we know that uplift is caused by plate tectonics. We talked about that. We've had tests and quizzes about that already. Uplifting is often caused by plate tectonics, the movement of the plates shifting, colliding, coming together, having nowhere else to go but up. And it also includes processes of volcanoes, intrusions, extrusions, folding, faulting, tilting, tsunamis. All of that will be the cause for the way the landscape is shaped. For example, in this picture, this landscape is shaped kind of funky. If you look at the top surface, it's got trees, of course, but it's also kind of dips down, and it has this surface that's kind of going higher in elevation and then going down a little bit lower, all due to tilting. Here they call it inclining, but it's definitely because of a leveling, uplifting force. Again, there was a fault, here's folding, an igneous intrusion. All of this will create and shape the landscape. Whoa, I'm getting kind of thirsty. That must lead us to our discussion of the most important leveling agent or flattening agent, running water. Excuse me. Water is actually the most important agent in erosion, and we've talked about that many times. It's so powerful it can wipe away cities, but it also will flatten any elevation that's higher. It will cause it to become lower. And we're going to talk a little now about the drainage patterns that some streams will create in a landscape. Now, the drainage pattern refers to the bedrock of the area, that way that the rock is, and the pattern that the stream will flow. It can be seen from overhead, and it creates a really cool pattern. Here are three examples. We have dendritic, radial, and rectangular, sometimes called trellis. So here in a dendritic, you can see by looking overhead, this is a hilly region, okay? And you can also see that the way the stream is flowing, it creates other smaller streams flowing into one larger stream. Here we have what's called a radial pattern, and if you look, the center is a volcano or a high peak. Well, the radial stream drain pattern is caused by that peak and the water flowing down from the precipitation or rain, and then it just kind of falling all in different directions coming out from that center peak. Down at the rectangular, you can pretty much understand from the bedrock that you see, there's not deep valleys or river valleys, so this has to be a relatively flat area. And if you notice, it's going in a certain pattern to go around certain rocks that are more resistant to the weathering. Looking at this a little more closely, dendritic is just as I said, the pattern occurs when all the rock resistance is similar, meaning there's no pattern whatsoever. It just kind of goes where it can. The hilly landscapes are very popular with the dendritic stream drainage. And there's the stream and all the little random patterns that come out of it. This is the rectangular stream drainage pattern, where you notice that the rock seems to go around a part of the stream. I'm sorry, let me reverse that. The stream seems to go around a part of the rock that it can't get through. So this river or stream is traveling. Oop, it's hitting this rock. It can't go through it. This rock is resistant to the agent of weathering or erosion there. So the water goes around it. It will move in the path of least resistance. So wherever it can manage to break through and go, it will. Occurring in plains, flat areas the most. And here's the radial pattern that I was telling you about in the previous slide, where we have where did my mouse go? Oh, there you are. Sorry about that. We have a peak right in the middle. And it leads to the streams draining from it, and it creates like a bicycle spoke, or what we call a radial pattern. Again, following the path of least resistance down the hill. Then we have these smaller branches off the bigger streams called tributaries. Now, Mrs. Naku used that in class the other day, but you may notice that this is a smaller stream that branches off from this larger river. That's known as the tributary. We also used the term watershed the other day in class, and a watershed is a land area that has all of the tributaries, lakes, rivers, and nearby areas draining into it. We also have something called a recharge basin, which will collect water so that we can use it for other purposes. Now, in the West Coast, we have what's called a divide. And you see in this picture the continental divide. It has an Atlantic Ocean drainage going one way and the Pacific Ocean drainage going the other way. Well, this is where our country is actually divided. And so water that goes on the east side of the mountain range at this continental divide, all of the water from that side of the mountain range will flow into the Mississippi River. Then all of the water that lands on the other side of the mountain of this divide will flow down towards the Gulf of California and be on the west coast. So it's kind of interesting. It actually is an area of higher elevation that separates one watershed from the other. And here, oops, sorry, this was a picture of our river systems and our watersheds in New York State. Here's a picture of a specific location in New York State, specifically as we see here, Niagara Falls, right here. Now, if you take your reference table, page 3 of New York State, and you find Lake Ontario, you will see that Niagara Falls is actually south of it. So if you want to get the same orientation of this map, you would need to turn your page 2 upside down completely, and you will have to then follow the path. But you see that Niagara Falls actually leads into Lake Ontario. Here is a picture of beautiful Niagara Falls flowing towards Lake Ontario. Here we go. This is what I was saying. Here's Niagara Falls flowing northward into Lake Ontario. Notice how rock types weather differently. We looked at this before, but now we're looking at it in terms of the shape that it makes with our landscape. The differences in rock resistance will create that interesting landscape. And here's another really cool, interesting feature that is created all by natural forces of weathering and erosion. You can see that the area that's missing was least resistant to weathering, and therefore it created that funky arch. Other leveling forces include wind, glaciers, and they're all driven by the force of gravity, of course. Now, an area will be more mountainous if uplifting forces were dominant in that area. And the opposite is true too. If leveling forces where erosion has been dominant, then the landscape will become plains or plateaus. They'll be more flat. And that brings us to the idea of dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic equilibrium is when everything is in balance. There's not a dominant uplift, there's not a dominant leveling. Everything is simpatico, in balance. Dynamic equilibrium. And that's the end of landscapes. We will see you next time.